Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you this morning from a somewhat wet and blustery London, I've got to say. As Amy mentioned, I'm Paul Montague. My role is that I cover the Middle East for GL education. In the Middle East, we've got a significant number of American curriculum schools that I work with on a sort of day-to-day basis. This is the second in a series of 2 webinars that have been recorded with regards to American curriculum schools. The first was run by John Conway, who's the principal of Sheikh Zayed Private Academy for Boys in Abu Dhabi. He talked there in detail about how they'd used map data and CAT4 to create their own performance progress index. This session is going to be very much more based upon how we can use CAT4 pedagogically. It will touch upon map and how we can compare CAT4 with map as well. Okay, I'd like to start, if I may, just by describing our assessments and who GL are really. The most important people to us are the students. They're the people who are actually doing the understanding, creating the meaning and the learning within the actual school. The teachers then are the second most important people within the organisation. It's your passion, it's your skill, it's your enthusiasm, drive, energy and pedagogical knowledge which is helping the learners to improve. Our assessments sit in between the students and the teachers, and they help to point the teachers in the right direction in terms of giving you the focus of where you should put your energy and your enthusiasm. CAT4 is our measure of potential, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today specifically. Using our assessments helps you to really personalize the learning. If we're personalizing the learning as much as possible, then hopefully that's going to lead to improvements in the quality of the teaching and learning that's taking place. CAT4 itself, okay, is an assessment of reasoning. It helps to identify people's developed ability and their likely academic potential. What they are capable of achieving is the key thing. It looks at 4 particular areas, and each area we refer to as a battery. So these 4 areas are the 4 areas that academically are proven to be the most important. So verbal reasoning, it looks at how a student reasons verbally, so we're looking at how they think with words. We look at their quantitative reasoning, which is how they think with numbers. We're looking at their non-verbal reasoning, which is thinking with shapes. And we look at their spatial reasoning, which is their thinking with shapes and space. I'll explain spatial reasoning in a little bit more detail as we move on through the presentation. Some examples here of a verbal reasoning question. Okay, the students are given 3 colors, green, blue, and red. Okay, and they have to select the most appropriate color from the remaining choices. So green, blue, and red, they are examples of colors in this particular case. They are examples of crayons. They are examples of paints. They could be colors of the rainbow, but actually they're colors in their own right. So the most appropriate answer would be yellow in this particular context. If we look at a quantitative reasoning question, the example here is 2 to 3 is the same as 9 to 10, which would be the same as 6 to, and obviously they're going up in ones, so that the correct answer there would be 7. This question here is looking at a non-verbal reasoning question. Okay, we've got 3 shapes. We need to identify what is similar about those 3 shapes in the example, and then pick the next one from the list of options that would be the most appropriate. So the common elements to those 3 shapes are that they're all shaded and they've all got 4 sides. So the only possible correct answer from the choices that we're presented with is D in this case. This is one of those spatial reasoning questions. What we've got here, we've got a piece of A4 paper that we've folded in half, we've hole punched, and then we've opened back up. Okay, so it's going to have 2 holes in it, and the position of those 2 holes is critical, but the only correct answer to this particular question is B. Okay. I want you to have a little think about this. This is one of the questions that doesn't appear in the actual test, but is one of our sample questions. So we've got a shape at the bottom, okay, and that shape fits into one of these 5 depictions of a shape. So you need to figure out which of those 5 that shape there appears in. I'll give you 20 to 30 seconds to think about it, okay, and then I'll sort of reveal the answer. Okay. Hopefully, nobody thinks it's the first one, okay, because it doesn't fit in the first one at all. That's the one that is most indeed wrong in all of these potential options. The second one, if you look at the dimensions of the shape that we're referring to, yes, it's a V, but actually it's not the right dimensions for it to fit into the second one. The same thing is with the third one. It's in no way, shape, or form the right dimension. The fourth one is the one that's most often selected, but is sadly a wrong answer. Okay, the correct answer is the last one. And if you look very, very carefully, you can see that shape would fit exactly into the 5th box and the 5th shape. Okay, what this enables us to do is to get a profile for individual students. And we can look at them from a verbal point of view, from a quantitative point of view, a spatial and a non-verbal point of view. Spatial thinkers tend to be very, very different in terms of how they learn. Okay, and so you can often do very, very important things with these pedagogically, which will help these learners improve the quality of the learning that's taking place. Some examples. Things you should be using with spatial learners are things like using images, pictures, and color, use of thinking maps, concept maps, and graphic organizers. Let the students take notes in pictures and diagrammatic form, reinforcing the big picture with them, using manipulative materials, using computer software, apps, modeling, and videos. All of those things are proven to work very, very effectively with spatial learners. We've got 4 examples here. My background was originally a geography teacher who then moved on to sort of an assistant head within the UK. And those are all examples from geography. So we've got a concept map or a mind map looking at global warming in the top right-hand corner. So if you're in the top 11%, so if you've got a score of 119 or above, you're in the top 11% of the pupils who've actually taken this assessment. Okay. Now, there's a comment there. Does that make you gifted and talented or not? That depends upon the nature of your school. It depends on the intake of your school. Some schools might be more selective than others. So whilst this is very good, it gives you a standardized age score, you will need to actually look at the numbers yourself in the context of your own school to see whether your children are gifted and talented based upon the standardized age score. Okay, the actual average score is 100. All right, so that's the average score, and any score sort of below 88 is below average. And as we move down to 81 and below, those are the sorts of children there that we would consider looking at in more detail for special educational needs assessment. Okay, this is an actual example from a school. There were 2 boys in this school whose data is vastly differing. The new deputy head teacher to this school actually ran the CAT4 test for the first time, didn't tell the staff what the results were, and asked the staff to comment on these 2 children. The commentary ran like this. Boy 1 has been a pleasure to teach, has never been any problem, has done really well in school, will likely go on and get B's and C's. His parents have been fantastic. It's been really supportive. And as we look at those numbers, I wouldn't argue with any of those statements. So his verbal score is 106, which is above average. Quantitative score 104, which is above average. The non-verbal score is 104, which is above average. And a spatial score of 98, giving a mean score of 103. So this student hasn't got an imbalance, hasn't got a bias in any way, shape or form, and the scores are above average and will go on and do well in school. Boy 2, however, was rather alarming. That the commentary from the teachers was, this student's been an absolute nightmare, been very disengaged in school. We've never been able to do anything with him. His behaviour has been a problem, been a real issue throughout his school life. We the school actually let the students stay on and do one A-level. That A-level was in art and design. If you actually look at the CAT4 results for this student, so boy 2, his results are absolutely phenomenal. We've got a quantitative score of 140. Remember, 141 was the highest score you can achieve. Non-verbally 141, that is the highest result that you can achieve. And spatially 139. This student should be going on to the top universities in the world to do STEM subjects. He had a significant and important issue, which was the verbal score was 80, and that was masking this student's real potential ability. If the school had spent some time addressing the verbal issues, so putting some literacy interventions in place, this student would have gone on and done magnificent things. As it was, the student went on with his art A-level, did animation, and then became really, really successful. But all through school, the student felt like a failure, when actually this is one of the strongest profiles that you could ever see from any student. Okay. Sad thing was that Mum used to come in to every parent's evening and say, "Why does nobody recognise the potential of my student?" And indeed, the fellow students used to recognise how able the student was and couldn't understand why the teachers were unable to see how able this particular student was. And this is a common occurrence. This profile is a common occurrence, not quite to the same extremities, but within international schools where you get an imbalance between their verbal scores, which tend to be lower than their other scores. So we can use CAT4 data on its own to actually look at the profiles of students and where their strengths and weaknesses are. We can also start combining it with attainment tests. Okay. So the example I've got in front of us here is we've got two students, X and Y. We're looking at their maths results in year 5, year 6, and year 7. These are standardized age scores. So we've got 106, 104, and 104 for student X. And for student Y, we've got 90, 100, and 110. We haven't got any CAT4 data in there at the moment. And if we were to sort of make a summary about how these students are doing, we'd suggest that student X was doing okay, wasn't making particular progress, although the same score with the standardized age score is making the same amount of progress as somebody of your birth month. So that is still making progress. So student X is doing fine. Student Y is making significant progress, and they're moving from 90 to 100 to 110. Okay, so before we put the CAT4 data in, the summary might be student X is doing okay, but student Y is making some excellent progress. Very, very pleased with what student Y is doing, and we're very, very happy with the progress that's being made. When we put the CAT4 data in, and we've just taken the quantitative score, we get rather a different picture. In that student X quantitative score for CAT4 is 99, and yet the attainment is much higher. So we've got 106, 104, and 104. So student X is actually doing very well. Student Y, who we thought was making excellent progress, is absolutely still making excellent progress. But we'd worry in terms of the CAT4 score saying they've got 135 quantitatively, and in year 5 they're only achieving 90 in their maths scores. Now what happened in this school was they identified that as underachievement based to the CAT4 score. So in year 5, the end of year 5, beginning of year 6, significant interventions were put in place, and that's why we started to see that improvement. The hope would be obviously by the time we get to year 8, year 9, that the standardized age score for maths would then be up to 135-ish, and they'd be reaching their potential in maths. But it's important, so you can use CAT4 individually on its own to look at the profiles, but it's much more powerful when you compare it with your attainment data to measure if they're attaining what they're capable of. This is an example now using specifically some map data, okay? And we've picked up on slightly different data here. We're looking at the national percentile ranks for maths scores, okay? And again, we've got student X and we've got student Y. So student X has gone from 80 to 81 to 78, whereas student Y has moved from 60 to 80 to 90. Okay, so student Y is making progress in terms of national percentile ranks, and student X is sort of flatlined and slightly decreasing. If we put the CAT4 national percentile ranks in, we can see that student X has got a national percentile rank for the quantitative score of 68. So the math scores that they're achieving in terms of national percentile rank are much, much higher. So they're doing much better than what CAT4 suggests they should be doing. Student Y, however, has got a CAT4 national percentile rank of 93. And so when they did their maths in grade 5, a 60 score would have been very, very alarming. Okay, they've now put some interventions into place, and now we're starting in grade 6 and grade 7 to see the math score move up to the same level as the national percentile rank. For those of you who don't know where the national percentile rank data sits, it's not on any of the PDF reports that we produce at student level for individual batteries. You'll find that in the Excel worksheet. So you need to export the data into Excel, and then you can manipulate that data and you can get the national percentile ranks for the individual batteries. How is CAT4 used generally by schools? Well, it's used to identify a student's potential. It's used to personalize the learning, and I'll show you how that's done in more detail through the course of this. It's used as part of the process for identifying gifted and talented children. Right at the start, I said it's a teacher judgment is vitally important, and you combine the CAT scores with the teacher judgment and with the work that they're doing in their classes to get an idea of who the gifted and talented children in your school are. It's relatively curriculum neutral. It can be used as an initial screener, and indeed is used in many schools as an initial screener to find the strengths and weaknesses of the children. It's used as an integral part of the process, as part of the process of setting targets. Many schools use it for admissions. It doesn't necessarily rely on pupils' understanding of English, so it's very good in different curriculum types, and there are instant results available for it. If you're in the UAE, and if you're in Dubai in the Northern Emirates, then it's part of the inspection framework there. And to be above expectations these days, this is how you must be using the CAT4 data. So it needs to be analysed rigorously. It needs to identify individual achievement gaps for all students, and that's what we've just done in previous slides, is look at the achievement gaps between certain students in terms of their potential to what they're actually attaining. You need to triangulate the data between standardized curriculum assessments and national agenda parameter benchmarks to identify strengths and weaknesses. And again, we've just shown you how that can be done. And this was a new thing that they introduced this year, in that all key stakeholders, including classroom teachers, are aware of and fully understand the analysis and how to use them to personalize provision. Okay, and that's the critical thing now, is in the classroom, the teachers on the ground, how are they using CAT4 to personalize the learning? So CAT4 gives you a variety of different reports at different levels. We're going to have a look at the individual report at this point. And before we delve into looking at an individual report, this is some work that the Education Endowment Fund has done. They're an organisation in the UK that look at intervention strategies and how successful or powerful they've been. Now, they've identified feedback and metacognition as the two most important types of intervention strategy that can help children learn. Okay, the individual report for CAT4, and indeed the student report and the parental report, are all giving you feedback about a student's metacognition. So they're very, very powerful and can be used extensively to help students improve within the classroom. Key educational influences for a child within school are pupils, teachers and parents. Yes, there's their peer group, and increasingly we're hearing that sort of 30% of the teaching, the learning, is done through peer-to-peer mentoring these days. But CAT4 actually gives reports or makes reports available for pupils, for teachers and the parents. So if these three key influencers are all adapting and using what CAT4 is suggesting they should be doing, then we're going to get more success for the learners. This is an individual report for a teacher about one student. Okay, now this is actually me. Okay, so this is going to tell you an awful lot about me. Verbally, I've got a standardized age score of 125. Okay, and which puts me, if we look at NPR, remember that was national percentile rank, it puts me in the top 5% of the students who've taken this particular test at this level. So, okay, I'm quite good verbally, and most teachers tend to be very, very good verbally. Quantitatively, I've got a score of 105, and if you remember, 100 was average, so I'm just above average quantitatively. It's not such good news when we look at the non-verbal score. Okay, my non-verbal score is 91. That actually means I'm better than sort of 28% of the sample, but worse than a lot more. Okay, spatially I'm 101, which again is average. Okay, so there's no real imbalance there. We've got a difference between my non-verbal score. My verbal score is very, very high. This is what CAT4 then goes on to say about me, and it's useful context in that this is absolutely true for me in terms of identifying how I learn best. It says I'm going to enjoy learning through written text, writing, and discussion. Yes, I did all of those things. Anybody that knows me knows I question and question and question when I'm sort of trying to learn things. It also then goes on and says that I'm going to perform well when using visualization and learning through working with pictures, diagrams, 3D objects, and mind maps. That was absolutely me as well. As I said, I became a geography teacher, and geography was always my strongest subject. Those sort of elements are embedded into geography. And I was very, very lucky. My geography teacher was brilliant and used to use those methods of instruction a lot, which is why I found geography so much easier. My spatial ability is in the average range. So it looked like learning methods such as modeling, demonstration, and simulations. Yeah, I did. Absolutely spot on for me. Do very well in language-based subjects. Yeah, I did better in language-based subjects, but may perform at a slightly lower level in subjects such as STEM that draw on spatial ability. And that was true as well. I was much better in language subjects than I was in sort of science. It then goes further and gives you implications for teaching and learning about me. Okay, it says I've got a relative weakness in understanding spatial concepts, but a highly developed verbal abilities. And that was true. So although I was a geography teacher, the part of geography that I used to find the hardest was the weather, and that's because it was more conceptual. You couldn't necessarily see it as easily. Expectations need to be appropriately high with enrichment activities, provide challenge and extension. Absolutely correct for me. Yeah. Whilst you should use a broad range of styles with me, I'm going to be self-motivated and independent learning. Yeah, that was absolutely correct. Okay, so it lists then things that you should do to try and get the best from me, or indeed your learners in your school. This is an individual report for a student. So the one I've just shown you is the individual report about a student for a teacher. This is what the student actually can receive if you choose to share it with them. There's less detail on this. There's less numbers on it. We've got the bar, which is showing their relative abilities verbally, quantitatively, non-verbally, and spatially. And we've got a summary of what their profile is like and what it says about them. Schools who use this most effectively will do a little presentation about what the numbers mean, what CAT4 is, and they'll follow that up with a sort of form session where students are looking at their own individual reports and going through them and saying what they agree or disagree with. They can also be used really, really effectively in one-to-one sort of discussions that you may have with students about their progress within school. I mentioned the report for parents. Yes, there's a report for parents as well. That's very, very similar to the student one. But again, it's how this report is used that's vital. The best use is to be used in actually a parent-teacher meeting where you sit down with the parents and you take them through the report and take them through what it says about their son or daughter. If it's just sent home in the sort of school bag and never gets opened or looked at, it's obviously not going to have as much impact. So it's how you use these reports that's really, really important. This is a group report for teachers. So this lists all the students in a particular class, and it shows you their relative abilities verbally, quantitatively, non-verbally, spatially, and then their overall score. I'm going to talk a lot more about what you can do with this individual data shortly. So we'll move from the group report. This is a summary report for senior leaders. Now what this does is it's quite high level. It looks at the whole cohort, and it looks at the relative strengths and weaknesses of that cohort. So what we're looking at here is the top left is just the verbal scores by gender. We've then got top right is the quantitative scores by gender. We then look bottom left at their non-verbal scores by gender, and bottom right is their spatial scores by gender. Okay. This next diagram or next graph shows you the impact that these can have. So now we're just looking at verbal scores. Those are two different year groups in the same school. Let me take you through the diagram what it means. So that the horizontal axis is where the standardized age score is plotted. So the further to the left you are, the lower the scores. All right, the further to the right you are, the higher the scores. The bar indicates if it's blue whether you're a male, and if it's pink whether you're a female. And the pink line is the national average. So we can see that the year group that's depicted on the left-hand bar graph is actually very, very weak verbally. Most of their scores are appearing in the below average or the very low category. So we've got a significant challenge with this particular year group in terms of their language acquisition, their ability in English. We need to put significant interventions into that year group, which can easily be identified by looking at this particular report. So these are in the same school, but if we look at the year group on the right-hand side, it's completely different. Okay, we've got a few more children in the average to above average category, and it's a completely different profile. Remember, this is just the verbal scores we're looking at. So these two year groups need very, very different interventions, and you need to allocate your resources very, very differently with these two year groups. This is obviously a stark difference between these two year groups. The context behind this is that the left-hand bar chart was the year group before the school started being selective, and the right-hand side was after they started being selective. So you can see a real sort of polarization in terms of verbal scores between one year group and the next. So this level of reporting, the Senior Leaders Report, can really help you identify which year groups you need to target, what resources you need to put in place. Okay. There are a number of things that you can do with the data if you export it into Excel. One of the most significant and important things to do is to look at the verbal deficit. The verbal deficit is the difference between their verbal score and their non-verbal score. What we're saying here is their non-verbal score, out of all of them, is their ability. Okay, and their verbal score, if their verbal score is lower than their non-verbal score, they could be doing really, really well because the non-verbal score is high. But if the verbal score is lower, it means there are issues with language acquisition in English and literacy that's preventing them from demonstrating how bright they are. Now, this can be a common occurrence in international schools. Language may not be, so English may not be their first language, and they may be having issues adjusting to English. They could be very, very able, but not being able to demonstrate it because their verbal scores are holding them back. If you use Excel, you can do a quick calculation comparing the verbal to the non-verbal score, and any score that's sort of 10 or more is significant. So by doing that, it really helps you to identify those children who would really, really benefit from some specific language support. What should you do with those children when you identify what they need? Well, most schools will use then a reading test to identify specifically what the issues are. We've got our new group reading test which can be used. Okay. Then when you've identified from the new group reading test what the specific interventions are that we're going to help and support them, if you put those interventions into place, you could then retest with NGRT and see what progress has been made. Gifted and talented children, I alluded to this earlier. CAT4 enables you to identify children who are gifted and talented. Now, some schools will just use the mean score, and they'll pick a mean score of sort of 119 or above. Okay, and you can see in this example we've sort of anonymized it. We've got rid of the children's names, but if we just use the mean score, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children who we'd actually recognize as being gifted and talented. Now again, that works for some schools just using the mean. I think it's much better if you look for scores in 2 of the batteries or more that are over that particular 119 value. In international schools in particular, you can see the verbal scores can be lower, and that's what might be affecting the mean overall. So when you're identifying your gifted and talented children, I'd always look at the individual batteries, and if there are 2 batteries or more over the 119, then that's a good indication that they're potentially gifted and talented children. And we'll move on to look at SEN children. Again, a mean score of below 89 is an indication that there's a weakness there that we may need to delve deeper into and do further investigative assessments. If we then look at individual scores, so for verbal, quantitative, non-verbal, and spatial scores, if we look at scores there that are 82 or below, those give us a real indication that there's an issue in that particular area that we need to investigate specifically. So you could pick a mean of 89, but then you can look at the individual batteries and look for scores at sort of 82 and below that might have significant issues in one particular area. Again, time is against us, so I'm going to skip through that particular bit. These are some examples of flags that can be used with your students and using the CAT4 data. So CAT4 score of 89 or below could be a flag for SEN, as we've just discussed. Quantitative scores below 82, a non-verbal or spatial score below 82, and a verbal score below 82 are also signs of concern that you need to investigate more specifically those areas with those children. If we've got a verbal deficit or indeed a surfeit that's plus or minus 10, then that's something that we need to investigate and put interventions in place. And again, this particular school looks at the gifted and talented children. If they've got 2 batteries above 118, they'll use that, or 1 battery above 126. The international school in Oman, they use CAT4 very, very effectively throughout the school. One of the most impactful things they do is they'll have a student of the week or a couple of students of the week. They'll pin the profiles up in the staff room of those students with their scores and a summary of what it says about those children, and then they expect the staff within the school to adapt their teaching to those children, at least in one of the lessons during that week. What this builds is an understanding of what the CAT4 data means. More importantly, it's encouraging the teachers to actually look at the scores, adapt their teaching methods, and then feed back to each other about how successful that particular adaptation that they've tried has been. Okay, very, very powerful way to get the teachers on the ground talking about their practice and what they've done differently as a result of sort of CAT4. I just want to direct you to some further follow-up videos. So Matthew Savage, who does a significant amount of work with us, he's done some videos that are available on our website. The link is there for you, and he talks through different profiles and what the intervention should be with students who've got those particular profiles. They're very, very useful if you wanted to run your own CPD within your school. They can be sort of starting points. Matthew, using Matthew's videos as the sort of description tool, and then follow up from your own staff. I alluded to the analysing data in an American international school, which John Conway did. Okay, there's a webinar that he's produced, but there's also a case study that's available. The link to that is provided for you there. And also the American International School in Abu Dhabi produced a case study, and there's a link to that there.